In this tutorial, I would like to talk more in detail about Grasshopper components. So components are objects that perform actions based on the input they receive. Let's now talk about the box-to-point component. Components usually have three main parts. So the first part is the input part. It's on the left side of the component, represented by letters. If you hover over a letter representing specific input parameter, you will get a short description about that input, what is required in that input. Usually it's the type of data. So you see here, A is represented as a first point, and you also see a black hexagonal icon representing data type, so that is a point. Second corner of that box is also a point, point B, and then P represents a base plane. In this case, box-to-point component by default has a plane already assigned. That plane is world XY plane, so it's the Rhino world XY plane. This way of getting some information about the inputs, it's also called a tooltip. If we right-click on a letter representing an input, you have this context menu, pop-up context menu open up. And here you can select to bake. We're going to talk about it in future tutorials. You can select to assign certain parameters or certain settings to that input. Mostly this is related to data flow, data structure. You can also assign expression. If I will talk about expression in different component. So, and you can also get help. To choose help, you have a short description of the input parameter. So let's go to the construct point component, and if we right click on, let's say, x coordinate and set the expression, we can say x plus 2 and commit changes. And as you can see now, it's not a cube anymore since I modified the x. If I change this expression now to 5, you have it even more elongated. Let's bring it back. Although here are the coordinates, even if there's some other type of numerical parameter, length, let's say, or whatever, and the letter is not x, let's say here we have a z coordinate. If I right click on it and set the expression, I can still use x as an unknown. X represents that input, and I could say plus 5, commit, and it still reads it. So the x is that changeable variable introduced in this algorithm. And this could be very convenient sometimes. Let's now go to the second area, which is usually in the middle of the component, and it's represented by an icon, or it could also be a label. but it's a unique icon for a component within Grasshopper. If you right-click on that icon or a label, you can here change whether you want to see a label or an icon. You can also actually custom name your component, which I don't recommend, but I'm going to be talking about it in future tutorials as well. You can turn on and off the preview. So this preview is about the preview in Rhino. So it's a rendering in Rhino. But then you can also disable the component, bake, and also get help. If we only hover over the icon, we would get again a tooltip, a short description about this component. And then the last part here, the third one, is the output area. As you can see here, we only have one output represented by letter B, and it says resulting box. Maybe I will go to params, inputs, I will grab panel just to see the output. Yes. So, and you can also see a hexagonal icon representing data type. If we right click it here, we also get a short context menu where we can select certain settings to apply to this output. You can also change names of the output or the input. However, just don't go too wild here, because for other people it might be more complicated to read your script if you go too widely with your custom naming. There are some components that do not output data. So they perform a certain action, but they stop data flow in a sense. Let's have a look at some of those. If you go to display in the component palettes under preview, let's select custom preview. So this component has a jagged edge showing that it's cut off. There's no flow going out there. But this component still performs action and it renders a preview. Let's connect now our box to input G, geometry. And there is a default color set, but if we want, let's double click on canvas, type in swatch, double click on the color to change the color, and let's connect with material. This preview could be set to more complicated one, like shaded options. So it could be more than just color, but for simplicity reasons, here I'm showing just color. Other components that do not have an output are vector display or point list. So these are, as you can see under display, they have also text tag. So they render information that we can see it, but they themselves do not transfer that. We cannot just transfer the information from them to other parts of our definition. So we talked about three basic parts of the component, that is the input, the component itself, and the output. Some components also have this black bar section, which represents a certain algorithm options. So if we go, let's take a look at a couple of them. I will maximize Grasshopper window. Let's go to sets, lists, select cross-reference. Again, under sets list, we can select longest list. So, and a bit different one, let's go to surface, primitive, and select bounding box. So there could be more of these, and if you download some plugins for Grasshopper, which are created by other people, other creators, some components could be even more creatively designed to have more outputs, and then these bars for some algorithm option or customization. So let's go ahead and see. If you right click on the component area, the icon, you can see how many options for this particular algorithm we have here. And of course, in this tutorial, I'm not going to explain these settings, but we're going to talk about some of them in the later tutorials related to data structure within Grasshopper. But just to show you that if you see something like this is just a sub option that you can choose. And then the algorithm performs a bit differently. And the bounding box is the one that I would say, even as a beginners using Grasshopper, you would often use. So if you right click on it, it also has this other option for the algorithm, which says union box or per object. So imagine if we have, so I will explain this a bit better now. So just imagine if we have more boxes. I know boxes about boxes, but let's just go with that. So we have 2 boxes here. Let's see what this bounding box component requires from us as to put as an input. It requires content. But as you see, the black hexagonal represents geometry icon. And then there's explanation, geometry to contain. So any type of geometry. So let's connect this one, and let's, using Shift key, put another one. So it's harder to see now, but you can see that now both of these objects has a bounding box for each of the box. But if we select the union box option, we would have one big box containing both of the smaller boxes, both objects. So this is how it works. I will leave it as a union box for now. Let's now talk about the Zoomable User Interface. So some of the components in Grasshopper has a zoomable interface, which means that if you zoom on the component, additional set of options appears and allows you to also apply some settings or modifications. So let's explore some of these components. Let's go to params input, and the first component we're going to talk is the panel. So the panel is one of the most popular these parameter input objects, which has zoomable user interface. So if we zoom enough, you can see a small menu appear. This allows us to, let's say, reduce our font size or increase it. We can change the font. We can also change color of the panel. There's some additional options regarding to data flow. I'm not going to discuss it here, since this tutorial is just to introduce you to this component structures. Okay, so the panel is one of the components that has a zoomable user interface. Another one I'd like to show you here, we would find under sets, list item. And here, if you zoom enough, you will see that we have a possibility to add outputs, to increase the number of outputs. So these outputs are used in a list. So when we are using data lists, and if I is set to 0, this index number, then -1 would be the last item on the list, and +1 would be the second item on the list. And this one is like 0 or the first item on the list. I know it's at the beginning might be a bit confusing that 0 is the first one, but that's it. When you get used to it, it becomes natural. Another component, it's merge. Yes, here. Merge. So if we zoom in to the merge component, here, contrary to the list item component, we can actually increase the number of inputs that we want to have by just selecting plus or minus sign. Similar to the merge component is Entwine. Again, we're going to talk about these components, these actually specific components in the future tutorials about with regards to data structure within Grasshopper. So this one is a very nice one, since it has both zoomable user interface, and it also has this black subsection where you can choose to flatten your parameters or graph your inputs. And as I said, we're going to discuss it later. So just to show you the variety of components and what sort of parts they have. So the last two are one in math, operations, addition. So this one is easy to understand. We zoom in. Of course, we can add different amount of data that we want to add. And the last one is also under math, script. And if we choose the script component, in this case, I'm going to choose Python. So in this one, it's the first one that we are discussing. We can actually increase the amount of inputs, the number of inputs that we want to use, and the number of outputs that we want to generate or get out of the script. So that's it with the components. Maybe the last part I just gonna mention that if you want to change the whole file preview, so if we want to change now that all of these components would have labels instead of icons, you have to go under the display and select draw icons or deselect that. And then you see your components change, except for box to point. This is because I changed them individually. That means these settings, when I change my component individually, then they do not correspond to the whole file. So in this way, you could maybe decide whether you want to be consistent with it or not. So that's it with the component parts.